Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the work session, Las Cruces City Council. Today is Monday, June 27th, 2022. It's approximately 1 p.m. Before we begin, I'm going to ask you to please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Jennifer Martinez from our Communications Office is going to introduce our Pets of the Week.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. I'm Jennifer Martinez with the City's Communications Office. And today I have the opportunity to introduce you to Cleo. Cleo is a 5-month-old cat who has spent the last few months with a foster mom. Cleo started out a little timid, but now is a little sweetie who does love to play. She has a ton of toys to choose from, but her feather, her ball, and her mouse are among her favorites. Her foster mom says she has quite a big purr and can't wait to use it in her forever home. And then we have Carmela. Carmela is a 2-year-old medium-sized girl. She is very affectionate and loves to cuddle. She's not a huge fan of cats, so she's hoping for a dog and people household only. Carmela has been found to be positive for heartworms, but her foster has already raised about half of the cost of the treatment so far, and they are willing to support Carmela's forever family through the rest of her treatment as well. If you're interested in adoption, please call the Animal Services Center at 382-0018. If you have free time and space, consider becoming a foster. This makes a little extra space at the center, but it also helps the pet get a little extra conditioning for a new home. There is also a downtown farmers market adoption event taking place from 9 a.m. until noon this Saturday, July 2nd. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer. Next is going to be our Jobs of the Week, and Dr. Francisco Palladas, the Deputy Director of Economic Development, will be presenting.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council. For this week's Jobs of the Week, we have an evidence supply technician with the City of Las Cruces. This position is paying $18.55 an hour, and it will be closing on the 5th of July of 2022. There's also positions available with Mesilla Valley Hospice Incorporated as a groundskeeper and maintenance assistant. These positions are paying between $11.50 to $16.25 an hour, depending on the experience, and it will be closing on the 24th of July of 2022. There's also positions available with Courtyard by Marriott at NMSU, and this is for a hotel maintenance engineer. This position is paying $16 an hour and will be closing on the 23rd of July of 2022. There's also positions available with Doña Ana County Head Start, and this is for a family outreach worker, paying $11.95 an hour, closing on the 23rd of July of 2022. And there's also a position available with the American Beverages for an administrative assistant position, and the salary for this position was not disclosed, and the position will be closing on the 21st of July of 2022. For a full list of jobs, internships, and volunteer opportunities, please visit employeenm.com or governmentjobs.com/careers/Las Cruces. And for the information of our friends at the New Mexico Workforce Connections Office, the phone number is 524-6250, and they're located at 226 South Alameda Boulevard in our downtown Las Cruces. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Palladas. Okay, so we have 2 items on the agenda. First one is going to be the GeoBond 2022 update, and David Ware from Community Development will be presenting.
Good afternoon, Mayor and City Council. David Weir at the Community Development Department. I'm one of the members of the team that's been working on the 2022 GeoBond initiative and effort. Today's presentation, the intent is to basically go over 4 points. The first is to again review the survey that was done by ARC with the initial public engagement. The second one is to go over the results that were conducted more targeted for the community and the project specifically. Then to go over, again, refresher on the GeoBond projects that have been identified to date, and then begin the discussion on narrowing down those priorities and creating ballot questions for the whole community. This slide reflects the survey that was done with all the public engagement, the 13 meetings that took place, public survey, and you can kind of see, this is a refresher that you had at your last work session, but you can see the top 3 or 4 projects identified that were public safety improvements, rehabilitation of existing parks, the development of a multi-purpose community facility, and then also continued work on the East Mesa Recreation Complex. Just again, this is a refresher of the number of input. Oh, excuse me. This is a slide on the second survey. Just some background information on that. This was targeted towards residents of the city of Las Cruces. It was also targeted for people that were registered, likely to be registered voters. The targeting of the people to take the survey was done with the email list that we have. It was also, there were links to it provided on the city's webpage and a social media boost. Whether they were registered as voters was a self-identification, so just for your information. When they did that, one of the questions they were asked with the second survey is if you were to prioritize the projects that were provided, how would you do that? On the left side of the slide, you can see the top 5. And then on the right side is the other 5 that were done. So you can also, there was a mean provided on what was the, how that ranking broke down. So you can see this survey, the top one was neighborhood reinvestment improvement. The second was the affordable housing efforts for the city. And the third was rehabilitation of existing parks. So you can see that all of those kind of group. And then your next one is a new fire station number 9. So that's the how they were ranked by the community. The next question was then took this ranking and said, how likely are you to vote in support of those? And so the rankings are kept the same, but you can see the percentage of support that each one of them received. I think of what's really of interest of this slide is that the community supported overwhelmingly with more than 60% the top 8. And then even the other 2 were near the 50% mark. So there was a lot of community support for all these projects that were identified. The next thing that we wanted to go into was, again, a review of the various projects that have been identified and try to put some preliminary costs to those. This is still pre-finalization of those projects, but the intent is to try to give you some type of priority of what the need is for each of these projects and the cost. So you can kind of see some of the criteria that played into it. If there was a site that needed to be acquired, what would the approximate cost of that be? What would be required to develop it? What's the design, administration, contingencies involved with that? And we just wanted to make sure that everyone knew that the projects would follow the city's public art ordinance, and there would be 2% of the projects going to those projects. The next slide just again reinforces that. This is the ordinance that the city has adopted, and these are the parameters under which funds are collected and allocated. In no particular order, we've kind of identified the projects. The first one is the neighborhood improvements. And so to give you some cost estimates on this, the city used its PCI for its entire street network. The slide that you see has the entire network on there with the different ratings that the streets have. It's also been underlaid by areas of moderate to low income, so that can give you some additional criteria where funds could go to improve those neighborhoods. The next slide takes those areas where the PCI is under 40%. Those are the projects where the city does the complete restoration or reconstruction of those streets. Some other items that were taken into this slide was that any of the streets that are not complete, the project would include all those elements, so those are taking place. It's also, the assumption is that the existing right-of-way takes place, so there's no purchase of right-of-way. And so the estimate to do those repairs, if the city's going to replace utilities at the same time, it would be $5.28 million per mile. And then if it was just the streets with no utilities, it's $3.7 million per linear mile. Park rehabilitation was another project that was rated highly. The total for improvements that could be done within the existing system, just for equipment and improvements to the parks, is $29.4 million. The slide includes all of the equipment that is in need or needs replaced or needs to be provided in your existing parks. So those are all capital purchases that could go towards the rehabilitating existing parks. This is also park rehabilitation, but there are, I believe, 11 or 13 parks on here that have outdated irrigation systems. And so if the city chose to rehabilitate the irrigation systems for these parks, it would be $3 million, and it would service almost 99 acres of parkland within the city. The city is in the process and has for a while continued to develop its trail and multi-use paths. Within the existing system, there are other improvements that could be done. One of the items is where the trails come to streets. There are 13 points that have been identified that could use improvements. It's estimated that those would each cost roughly $500,000. And so that would come to a total of $3.9 million to make those improvements. And then the continued completion of the Las Cruces lateral and the Tortugas trail are also, there are some improvements or connections that need to be made. And so for this purposes, for the Las Cruces trail, it's roughly a little bit more than a half a mile. And then Tortugas, almost 7/10 of a mile. And both of those add up to $2.9 million to complete that part of the trail system. Fire station number 9. This isn't changed from your earlier presentation, just some assumptions that it would be a facility similar to fire station number 3. It would be located on the East Mesa. The goal is City Council District 5, and the estimated cost is $11.5 million. This slide just shows you the area that we have high growth, the Metro Verde, Rincon Hills area of the city. Affordable housing was another item that's been discussed throughout this process. The ask has been in the neighborhood of $4.6 million. This is something that the city has identified in their efforts. The city does have a land bank and trust fund. They have a housing plan to address projects to be targeted towards affordable and attainable housing. And so those are all projects that can also be supported by a GO bond funding. Again, this slide just talks about where some of those projects would be targeted. It would be helping things like both profit and nonprofits to do housing at all levels, whether it be single family, rental, missing middle, and apartment complexes. And it also would help them with the funding of their projects. An idea that was put forward was the multi-purpose community center. Some of the parameters that have been talked about that would be resources for the planning, design, and acquisition. Again, it was thought that this would be, the need would exist on the East Mesa. Would be a need for 10 acres or more, and there are multiple city activities and programs that could be operated out of that site. Because there was not definite plans done yet on this, there's not a total figure for it, but I know in the other conversations they talked about $750,000 for the planning, design, and construction plans for such a project. Another one is, again, improvements to the library system. And so there were cost estimates provided for both renovating the existing Brannigan Library. That estimate was at $14.4 million. And then there's also been discussions about building a new branch library, and the estimate of that was $12.3 million. And that does not include land costs. That is just actually construction of the facility. A project that was started with your 2018 GO bond project was the East Mesa Recreation Complex. On the left of this slide is the master plan for full build out of that site. And then the graphic on the right is the projects that are underway for currently underway utilizing the 2018 funds. And so the slide and the cost estimate is at full build out of that facility. And so you see the amenities that would be provided on this slide, the multi-use fields, the supported parking, development of trails, and all the ancillary capital improvements to support that type of utilization. And that had a estimate of $36 million to totally build out the East Mesa Recreational Complex. And so this slide shows you those estimates all together. The last three on the right side, I did not provide the funds for that because it would depend at what level you wanted to fund those. But just those projects provide a estimate of improvements or projects that could be utilizing a GO bond at plus $142 million. So I don't think there's any issue with you coming up with the use of any GO bond funds you support. As staff has reviewed this and gone to the public with this, we've always presented the option that we're assuming that $23 million is the ceiling of the project. At that level, you don't raise the taxes. It's the same debt service rate that we currently exist. And so this kind of is the transition slide as to council focuses on what projects that you want to direct those funds for. As was presented your last work session, there's two ends of the spectrum to approach this. One is to focus on a limited number of projects, your funds, or the other is try to provide a little bit of funding to each one. So this is a graphic you saw a couple of weeks ago. This is ARCS, how they approached a methodology to allocating funds. One was the very focused. At this stage, you could dedicate, in this scenario, you could dedicate all the funds to the East Mesa Recreation Complex to move towards completing it. Another one would be to split those funds between the East Mesa and the Fire Station number 9. And then the last two options are where you kind of spread those funds about. So you have one where you identify 3 of the projects, and the last one you try to allocate it to the top 5 or 6 projects through their process. This other scenario takes the second survey into account, and so the top 5 priorities are provided on this. Again, if you wanted to focus it all onto the top priority from the survey, that would be $23 million for the neighborhood reinvestment. And at that level, depending on what streets you chose, you could improve a little over 6 miles of right-of-way, or if it's the most expensive, not quite a mile of improvements. A second alternative is, again, is to split that funds between neighborhood reinvestment and a fire station. The last 2 options are basically taking the projects and dividing the money evenly. So the third option is dividing between neighborhood reinvestment, affordable housing, and existing park rehabilitation. And the last one is just taking those and dividing it by 5. So that's one way to, again, begin the discussion on how you prioritize those projects. Next steps, as you say, today we're here at the work session. The schedule is on July 18th that we would finalize projects that council wants to bring forward to the public and finalize those budget questions. If there's additional meetings and discussion that the council wants to have, they can be scheduled for the August 1st or August 15th meeting. Our hard deadline is August 23rd when the questions have to be provided to the Doña County Clerk's office. And that ends the presentation. Would be happy to address any questions. There are other departments and staff that also can address your questions.
Thanks, David. I was just going to ask if you could go back to the list where you had all the different 1, 2, 3, and 4, and the different projects and the amounts. No, I think it was one before that. Yeah, because later on I'm going to ask council to give me a 1, 2, 3, or 4. The next one, please.
Okay.
Did that one? Yes. Okay. Questions, Councilor Flotis?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Weir. So The East Mesa Recreation Complex won't be done with the last GO money, with the GEO bond money that was raised. So what you've presented today is an additional amount, and if we just go, I guess, year by year, it won't be done for about another 8 years, 10 years, right?
I really don't have a firm answer for you that. It depends on if the other funding sources were to come available or other funding in addition to GO bonds.
But if we went with GEO bonds exclusively, it would take a good 8 to 10 years, based on that breakdown.
I haven't penciled out the math.
Well, I did, and I'm asking you. No, I'm just trying to follow that, because that's how it appears to be to me, which means that the money that was allocated what is true is that the money that was allocated through GO bond money, GEO bond, government obligation funds, weren't enough to complete the complex. So what concerns me is that we're voting on these different items, or we're raising some of these things weren't up last time around, 2 years ago.
Correct.
So my concern is that the monies that have been allocated for certain GEO bond projects hasn't been enough. And so it seems to me that if something has already begun, that we should focus on finishing those. On the other hand, there's a lot of need for all these other GO bond measures. And then and the other thing is that, for example, because the East Mesa Recreational Complex hasn't been completed, the anticipated 8 pickleballs that were planned to go up haven't gone up, and the pickleball people are back. That sounds good, huh? Pickleball people are back. So, and which is wonderful, because apparently it's a wonderful sport, and once I become a retiree, I'll look to see if I have time to go play. But seriously, I'm concerned about that we keep voting, we're voting on measures, and yet the previous round didn't really complete the projects we had anticipated would be done. So how does that work? And then are we going to be perpetually going for GO bond money? And then, and I'm not just talking about the East Mesa, just because that's in my district, but I mean across the board. I mean, how long will we, in perpetuity, go on, doing the GO bond elections? So how does that work, Mr. Weir?
Mayor and Council Flores, I'll take a first stab at it, and I see the cavalry's come too.
You're very fortunate.
I think one thing to keep in mind is the purposes of a GEO bond. Typically, it's something for large capital projects that don't have funding sources. So as a growing community, you're always going to have needs, or the community is always going to have needs for these capital projects. And so when you keep that in mind, if at the 23 million level this time, you have an opportunity to continue to raise large amount of monies to do these big projects and not increase the debt service for the citizens. And as the community grows, there's more funds that get collected for these projects. The second thing I want to say is my understanding that the East Mesa property was master planned, and there was a realization, even with the 2018 bond, that it wouldn't be built out with just one bond cycle, that as it was programmed and funds were available, it would continue to be constructed. And so I think we kind of used the terminology phases when we really need to talk about moving towards full build out of the master plan, because we realized it would be multiple phases. And then getting back to your last question, I think that's something that if you look at this as a capital funding mechanism and a way to get those large projects that don't have a dedicated funding source, I think the intent was for council to consider keeping this as a program for the community to raise funds. So it
is pretty much a perpetual endeavor until we're able to complete a given project, right? I mean, there's no other source of funding for those projects.
Well, the other thing that goes into geo bonding is those are community questions. If the community supports them, this will be a mechanism that'll be used. But if they don't support a certain project, they won't be funded. David, did you want to?
Thank you, David. Mayor, Councilor Flores, David Cedillo, Public Works Director, for the record. To answer your question, yes. Based on council's desire on how much funding on a GO bond cycle to move towards completion could take 2 or 3 cycles. I believe you saw the estimate from the consultant at our last work session. Their estimated cost to move forward and complete it at this point was $36 million, based on funds or the dollar value that we will have in 2024.
Excuse me, Mr. Cedillo, otherwise I'll forget. I'm sorry for interrupting, but so that money, the 36 million, would that be for the uncompleted and for the prospective round of GO bond projects?
Councilor Flores, that is moving towards completion after the first phase. Correct.
So the 23 million isn't going to be enough to complete what we already started.
That is correct, and that's why I said it may take either 2 or 3. Now, at this point in time, the GO bonds is the major funding source. In future years, there may be opportunities for us to go and seek other funding opportunities. What those may be may come in the form of grants. So there are other options to help move the completion along. But at this point in time, what we have right now before us is the GO bonds.
Well, that really makes me scratch my head because it seems like the cost of everything has gone up exponentially as well. So we're kind of going down almost like a quagmire or quicksand or something where we can't get ahead for being behind, can't catch up. So is that pretty much it? I mean,
At this point in time, the snapshot of today's dollars, yes. What that's going to look like in 4 or 5 years, that may change. But right now, we're giving our best estimate based on current conditions and what that dollar value will be in 2024.
wow. Thank you very much, Mr. Cedillo. Thank you,
Very
Mr.
welcome.
Weir. Thank you, Mayor.
Councilor Bencomo?
Oh, Mayor, thank you. Thank you so much, David, for the presentation, and Mr. Cedillo. In the scenarios, neighborhood reinvestment, if, let's say today we said, you know what, we're going to do 23 million towards that. You're saying that we'd be able to do 6 miles of road.
Mayor and Councilor Bencomo, based on the estimate of what the cost is in those 2024 dollars.
David, I'm wondering if you can talk to the feasibility of that, right? Like your capacity, those kinds of things. And maybe I'll tell you why I'm asking this, because I was just talking to Aoife about this last week, and clearly this keeps coming up as the #1 priority for our community, right? And I know you know better than any of us up here how often people call about the roads and the condition of the road and all of those things. It's the one thing I get the most calls about. So I think it's important that, you know, if we're asking for the public's input about priorities, that then we're able to say, look, if we can't do that, because to me, you know, doing $23 million to only get 6 miles of road, right, that's heartbreaking, and in many ways. And so I want to be able to talk about, well, I guess it's maybe, I'll say, speak for myself. This is my opinion as to why this would be difficult for the city to pursue. I'm curious your thoughts on that as the expert.
Mayor, Councilor Bencomo, David Cedillo, Public Works Director. Again, and to answer your question, 6 miles of road is a lot of work. It is. So based on the breakdown that we have, so a mile will cover anywhere between 12 to 16 blocks
Okay.
of city roadway. So based on that, that's a lot of work. So right now, we would be addressing those streets that do have a PCI or pavement condition index that's lower than 40. Those do need full rehabilitation or reconstruction. So they would include utilities. But the estimate was given to have both projects with utilities for a full reconstruction or only just the roadway. 6 miles in 4 years is a lot of work. We do have internal staff that will work towards that. However, we do have the capability to outsource through our consultants to help that need if that is council's desire to move forward with that. With any portion of it, it's going to be a lot of work. But we do have the means, both internally and with consultants, to get through those.
Thank you, David. That's helpful. You said 1 mile would be about 16 blocks?
Correct. So a quarter mile will be anywhere between 3 to 4 blocks.
Okay.
So that's why I said anywhere between 12 to 16 blocks will equal about a city mile, if you will, of roadway.
What is the reality in terms of going forward with no utilities? What does that mean? Do you have some roads that you're saying we don't actually need utilities in this road? Or are you moving towards, if you're going to do full reconstruction, it's got to be with utilities?
So we definitely have a need throughout all spectrums with both pavement replacement and full reconstructions. However, the red streets are the ones that cost are exuberantly high, correct? So that's where the city, the residents would benefit from having those done, because then it both includes in the funding, both money and funding to do both not only the utilities, but also the roadway as well. So this also helps save existing budgets to further other projects along as well.
David, as a public works director, have you talked to the folks working on GO bonds around an analysis as to what would be feasible and doable? Like, you're saying 6 miles in 4 years would be wild, right? You didn't say that, I said that, but that's how I interpreted it. Have they talked to you about, okay, give us an analysis of what would make an impact still and doable?
If I was going to say the best part of that, I would prefer about $10.5 to $11 million. I think that is a more reasonable amount of cost, not only for both staff support, but to be able to build those out in a 4-year time period. Because we do have some projects that are in design. However, based on some of these red streets and what we want to look at, we may not have a design.
Okay.
So I think a good success would be somewhere around the $10.5, $11 million.
Okay, thank you, David. I really appreciate that. I don't think my next questions are for you. Oh man, my notes are crazy today. Actually, they might be for you, David. The mid-block crossings at the trails, can you tell us what that means?
As part of the presentation?
Yeah, so the further funding for the trail system, there was one portion that was $3.9 million for the crossings at 13 locations, right? What does that include? Does that include the striping, HUC systems? What is that? Oh, and you may be getting some help.
Mayor, Councilor Bencomo, I will defer to Kathy Matthews from Parks since that was part of
Thank
the
you.
Parks slide.
Thank you, David. Kathy Matthews, landscape architect with Parks and Recreation. The idea of the mid-block crossings is wherever a trail intersects with a road, not at an intersection. And with the number of trails that have been recently completed, there are quite a few of those areas. The idea, we don't know exactly what type of mid-block crossing would be required until a traffic analysis is conducted and then designed. But they could range anywhere from signage and a crosswalk to a full-on HOC system where a pedestrian-activated crossing system where a person presses the button, traffic is stopped on the street while that person crosses, similar to something that's currently exists on University Avenue, for instance. So it's an estimate of what might be required, and the idea was, in my opinion, was to estimate a little bit high so that we could account for mid-block crossings that would require the most extreme intervention, per se.
Okay, thank you so much. I appreciate that information. David, do you have any thoughts on, so the East Mesa Rec Facility complex, that was a priority 4 years ago, right? I'm wondering if you all have a thoughts or an analysis as to why it has placed so low on the priority list this year.
Mayor and Councilor Bencomo, I think maybe when people were doing the priorities, they looked at what do I already have? My home or my residence served by a street. I already have neighborhood parks, so I'd like that taken care of first. If you go back to the survey itself, all the projects looked like they were close to over half the likely voters to support them. So, and I. It was right at 50% support for that project too. So I think that's within the margin of error of support. So I don't think people don't support the development of it. I think there's just things that they would like to see first as opposed to something new.
Yeah, I mean, I'm, looking at these results for sure, I feel really conflicted. I thought this was going to be a much clearer process, honestly. But I feel really conflicted because, as Councilor Beta said last time we discussed this, she said, I like to see completion of projects, which I think is a really big deal and it's really important, and we don't want to leave things half done. And when I look at this, right, it's like the community's clearly telling us, we want to see investments in our neighborhood. We want to see better streets. We want to see affordable housing. We want to see improvements in our parks. And so, and then there's a balance of some of our internal needs as well. Like, it is very clearly that we need another fire station to maintain public safety, to maintain the fire department's ratings. Like, those are really critical things, but they're kind of hard to tell the public, right? Especially the folks who don't live in that area, even though I would, argue that the entire fire system is impacted by a new station. I don't really know where I'm going with this. I guess I'm just, I think it's important that I say this out loud because it's how I'm thinking about balancing out these things. And then the last thing I'll say, so I pass it on to my colleagues, is that I really do want to continue having a conversation about a recreational center, a new one. I think we've outgrown Mearshite as a community. However, given that there's already a significant investment on an East Mesa complex, that we have a conversation about it being somewhere else other than the East Mesa. And I think, often older districts don't get new parks, and so for fairness, if we continue that conversation outside of the GO bond discussion, that we, consider those equity issues. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, David.
Councilor Beta.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, David. And thank you, Councilor Bencomo, for some of your comments. I know that I've been very clear with me liking to have finished projects, and I actually see the East Mesa kind of as a reason why you have to have finished projects. This is one, and we're going to get an update, but the public hasn't gotten to access or use this type of area. So in their mind, and what is the value? What has their public dollars gone to? And they're not able to have that tangible thing yet. And so for me, it's not quite surprising that it ranks lower because it's not been able to be used and showcased. And so I think that's why it is important to make sure that we are finishing out those projects, that we are not wasting those dollars that we've already put in and making it a usable space. But with that in mind, I really am glad that we brought up the idea of equity, especially with older districts that aren't going to get to see some of these big spaces because we are already built out in a lot of ways. So as we go on with GO bonds, I'd love to be able to have that sort of layer attached to it so that we can make sure that we are balancing everything. Of course, one of the questions that I did have was on the trail system. And would this, by adding some of these, does it complete some of those loops as well? I know we were very close to some.
Mayor and Councilor Beta, I'll take the first stab, and I think I saw Kathy move towards the front. I believe the bottom two bullets of this slide would bring a couple of those trails more likely to completion, and that we're working on now.
Thank you, David. That's correct. The idea is that the Phase 2, what's titled here, Phase 2 Las Cruces lateral would be complete. Pardon me. The idea is to complete the section between Bouts and Main Street, in addition to any kind of work that would be required between Bouts and University, potentially also from University south to Union, and then the Tortugas Trail. It takes the trail along the Las Cruces lateral again from Union south to Tortugas.
Okay, thank you. I'm very excited to see that because I know that that's also needed for a lot of the races that they have and things like that too. And I think my final comment is just, I'm always in support of things that are needed. And so public safety is one of those that obviously ranks very high. And then just a reminder, that I do think that us being able to even demonstrate the progress that we have done with the East Mesa complex will be important if we do decide to put that back on the ballot, so that people still feel invested and engaged. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Okay, if there's no more questions, I think there's some members of the public that wanted to speak. I was asked if there was someone from the Affordable Housing Initiative. Are you all here? Yes. Can you raise your hands, please, that are here? They had asked, well, pretty much everyone, they had asked for a 15-minute presentation. So if I'm going to do 15 minutes, then probably not going to allow you all to speak again. Is that okay? Okay. All right, good. Or they get 2 minutes each, so, yeah.
Mayor, City Councilor, and staff, my name is Beth Bardwell, and I'm co-chair of the Las Cruces Coalition for Attainable Housing. And I have packets here for each of you that I'm going to distribute, and they contain reports that demonstrate the need for affordable housing in Las Cruces is high. Information on the impact of the COVID pandemic on housing instability that illustrates the urgency of increasing attainable housing in the city. The results from the city's most recent public opinion survey, where affordable housing initiatives were ranked as the #2 priority. Planning documents that show attainable housing has been a priority of the City Council for the last 10 years, beginning with the 2009 Affordable Housing Plan that recommended dedicating a $5 million general obligation bond to the Affordable Housing Land Bank and Trust Fund, to the 2020 Elevate Las Cruces Comprehensive Plan, to the most recent 5-year strategic plan prepared by the city manager. But data and plans only tell part of the story. We are joined by several community members who are working with community and families for whom attainable and affordable housing is a priority, and they will tell you the rest of the story.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Councilors. Thank you for this time. My name is Dave Lynch. I'm the AARP New Mexico State President and lead in our local community presence team. I'm here to talk about affordable housing. We need to ensure that our families, as well as new retirees coming to Las Cruces with lower incomes, are able to find properties where they will spend less than 50% of their income on housing. New Mexico is 49th in the nation for the overall well-being of children, a result of having to decide, due to lack of affordable housing, how to spend the remaining income dollars. For seniors, veterans, and disabled, over 30% of retirees in New Mexico depend on Social Security for 100% of their income. At an average $1,300 per month Social Security for retirees in New Mexico, we can be assured that many are receiving in the neighborhood of less than $1,000 a month. They then have to decide how they're going to use the remaining income, which usually means a lack of medical care and nutritious foods. We need to help Camp Hope provide housing for their residents. I've seen in visiting Community of Hope how proud residents are of their housing. We can also look at ADUs to help provide housing to lower income people, and that will also provide income to the homeowner. Housing, especially affordable housing for all, is one of the 8 domains of livable communities. Having funds earmarked for affordable housing helps our status as a member in the Age-Friendly Community Network and will help in the implementation of Elevate Las Cruces. Thank you.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Rosa Morales, and I'm here to support the inclusion of $6 million for the affordable and accessible housing in the next GEO bond. I will be making my statement in Spanish to bring awareness to the needs of a large number of the population that I don't think it has been given the wide opportunity to participate in this process. Okay, buenas tardes, mi nombre es Rosa Morales. Estoy presente para apoyar la iniciativa de alojamiento en el próximo bono municipal. Es importante que los bonos municipales de obligación se utilicen para proveer por las necesidades básicas de alojamiento de los residentes en las cruces. Estos residentes incluyen familias, niños, personas mayores, veteranos, personas con discapacidades, etc. Nuevo México se encuentra en el lugar 49 de 50 estados en la nación en el bienestar de los niños y consecuentemente afecta a las familias. Esto nos indica que existe una gran cantidad de familias viviendo en las cruces que están teniendo problemas para sobrevivir. El precio de una casa en las cruces subió 24% entre los años 2019 al 2021. La lista de espera para recibir alojamiento continúa siendo muy larga, de 2, 4 y 6 años. Varios reportes indican que existe una escasez de 5,600 unidades de renta en las cruces. El bienestar físico, mental y social de un gran número de residentes se encuentra gravemente comprometido si la ciudad no empieza a invertir en crear casas, especialmente para estas familias que están tan vulnerables. Muchas gracias.
Good afternoon, Mayor, Council. My name is Art Marujo. I'm the Programs and Operations Director for Tierra del Sol Housing Corporation. TDS, as you know, we provide affordable housing throughout the county, throughout the state, and West Texas. We do multifamily, and we do single-family housing development as well. We have been in existence. Next year, we'll be celebrating our 50-year anniversary. So as you see, there is a need for affordable housing. We've been here for 50 years. You can't say much about nonprofits being here for 50 years. And it occurs to me that the need is still there after 50 years. So, in essence, I see that the amount allocated was $6 million of this GO bond money for affordable housing. And I want to put into perspective on how we manage our HUD funds, to give you a sense and an idea of how you leverage these funds. Because I really think if we can find a way to leverage that $6 million and turn it into 20, 30, 40, 50, $100 million, then it's a win for everyone. So I do have a pamphlet here, and what I'll do is Rose wanted me to share this with you. You all know Rose Garcia. We are in a program with HUD, with the consortium members throughout 5 states in the southern part of the United States. We work with Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, Texas, and Utah. What we do is we leverage SHOP funds, which is for acquisition, construction, and development. Each lot is allocated $15,000. In the past 10 years, we have administered $12 million to our consortium partners, providing over 1,000 units of housing and leveraging $109 million. So as you can see, if you take half of that 12, which is their $6 million that's allocated for out there, for this affordable housing, there's a potential that you could hit $50 million. Here in Las Cruces, we leverage as much as we can, but right now we are running into a mud because what we're finding is that as we do affordable housing for the income that we serve, it's hard to compete, it's hard to do it when your construction packages go up 30%. There's a population out there that's in need, and I don't know if COVID was a blessing for us, because it has brought in more clients to TDS, and we're not talking low-income clients now. We're talking people who are making, or families making $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 who are looking for affordable housing, because they see the need that with the rising costs, with inflation, gas, food, they want to control the housing price. So, as y'all can see, if you would really take this in consideration and see how much you can leverage with just that $6 million. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mayor and council members. My name is Reverend Carolyn Wilkins, and I'm a minister. I have a church here called Inspirational Ministries, and we have donated to the homeless. We've donated to children. We donated clothes and other things in the city. But what I want to talk about today is it's hard to keep donating without doing something and providing affordable housing. When we build affordable housing, we enhance the public health of our community. A physical and mental well-being of the adults and children are enhanced through safe, secure, and stable shelter. Households that are cost-burdened, those that spend more than 30% of household income on rent or mortgage, have limited ability to withstand economic crisis or job loss, as was just spoken. Our challenges ultimately lead to housing instability and other major sacrifices that impact health and welfare. For example, unaffordable housing hinders the family's overall ability to pay for necessities that support good health, such as healthy food, health care visits, energy, or home maintenance. Adults who are homeless or housing insecure are less likely to have goal-oriented thinking and more likely to experience psychological distress, substance use, intimate partner violence, and symptoms of trauma. And I really hope you're paying attention to these things because they impact all areas. In fact, I'm working with two of the council members, Ben Como and Mayor Pro Tem Gondra, on a homeless solution for the unhoused with the interfaith organization that we're building in Las Cruces. But I want to also talk about the impact on children. Children learn more when stable housing allows for school attendance in their community. And children who are homeless or housing insecure exhibit more antisocial behavior, less pro-social behavior, more sleep problems, and have difficulty staying awake and advancing in school. Children are more likely to meet developmental milestones when raised in stable, healthy housing in which they are not exposed to lead, mold, vermin, or other threats. We have a significant opportunity. I hope we can move up affordable housing in this matrix that puts affordable housing in section number 3. I don't know what that means, but it doesn't look like it's a priority for this council, and I'd like it to become one. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mayor, councilors, Mayor Pro Tem. My name is Shannon Reynolds, and I'm here to talk about a little bit about veterans and a lot about affordable housing. First thing, there's about 7,900 veterans in the city of Las Cruces. If you taking just a cursory poll, it appears that many of our homeless are veterans. And the veterans are a significant challenge that meets a lot with what the last person just said, and that is that they're very complex. And just getting them a place to stay is not the only solution. and it requires a lot more like surrounding services to support them, like many of our other lower income families as well, for the ACES group. So veterans kind of fall into that special category as well. So along with looking at the affordable housing, I think we have to get a little more creative in the way that we approach this, and not just say, look, we're going to build units and have people come. We built the unit down on Solano. It's supposed to be mostly for veterans, and I think very few veterans have actually taken advantage of that. So maybe that's not the exact solution we need. Maybe we need to be a little more creative with it. And so I want us to think of that. Something else that I think is to look at is that Doña Ana County is currently, if you look at the rent, the amount of rents that rental units that are not available, we actually have less rental units available in this city than any place else in New Mexico right now. We're running at like 1.5% occupancy vacancy rate in the state of New Mexico. That means that even if you wanted to rent an apartment and it was affordable, it'd be almost impossible to get because it's just not there. Same thing with a lot of the low-income housing. The low-income housing we really need isn't being built, can't be built, again, because of this gentleman's pointing out that the costs are higher, up to 30%. So we have to stop and think, okay, how can we impact that, is one of my thoughts. A couple things I thought about is we're going to have to be flexible about how we react to the changes in the economy, the inflation, the job situation. We're going to have to think, how does our investment in affordable housing actually make it easier for people who are not getting raises with higher inflation going to be able to afford it? So we've got to think some financing solutions along with that. Another thing that I can tell you that I think directly impacts the cost of housing, especially for new construction, is the services that you provided with inspections, plans, efficiency of getting out there to look at things, working with the builders to make sure that they are not suffering with more carrying charges for a project that you could do in 30 days. It takes 6 months. That's in the county as well. We're having the same problem. We don't have enough resources at the county or at the city to make sure these builders can get these projects done in a record amount of time. So I think we need to look and try to work together with them to try to do some more of that as well. Timely inspections, timely approvals, looking at energy efficiency, and more inspectors based on our goal, not based on what's currently happening. So projecting 2035, 2025, what our needs going to be, we need the resources now to make that a reality 10 years from now. Okay, thank you.
So I didn't realize you were all going to do what you just did. So who hasn't spoken yet? Or have all of you spoken? Because I was going to give you a couple more minutes if needed. All of you got it done? Oh, good. Okay. Is there anybody else who'd like to speak? George?
I just want to finish with saying thank you for your time today.
Sure, of course.
George Pearson. The new trails haven't even been officially opened yet, but I believe they are being very well used. In the last cycle, $35 million of bonding was done, with 2.7 of that towards the trails. If we just take that same proportion with $23 million, we'd have about $1.5 million, $1.7 million that would go towards the trails. I think that would be a good balance to plug into the chart as you work with. There's where to spend that can still be decided by staff. We've talked about connections, we've talked about safe road crossings, those are all needed. And something else to remember, trails are not just recreational, they are transportational needs, and that fits exactly with the affordable housing discussion that comes in. The cost of living is not just the cost of housing, it's also the cost of transportation, and that's where we need equity in where we build our trails and how we spend our money. Thank you.
So David, I guess you're up. So the only question that I have is, if you notice on, I guess there's a slide 24. So I guess what I was trying to get at is, so prior to seeing slide 25, I had just seen 24. So, and of course they're a little bit different.
Sure.
So what is slide 25 the second survey, or what?
Mayor, just to again provide some context, the first slide is what you saw 2 weeks ago. This is ARC, they walked you through one way to look at the various projects. This one placed more of an emphasis on completing ones you've already started. And so that was kind of how they started on the left and then moved to the right. The second one is really just an example. This puts the priority on what the public said in the second survey. So those were the ones that they prioritized, and that there was also over 60% support for those type of initiatives. And really, the money was just for demonstration purposes. There's not been any analysis into it. It's just to let you look at various ways that you could divvy these projects.
Okay, I have a question of Chief Jason Smith on the fire station. So Chief, can you tell me, I'm gonna guess that you probably look at the certain demographics that after the area reaches a certain percentage of residents that you probably think, okay, we're gonna need a fire station here. Are we, what is that number, and are we at that number? Have we surpassed it? I'm trying to get a need for how quickly you need to build station number 9.
Thank you, Mayor, members of City Council, Fire Chief Jason Smith. So we did not analyze a number as far as population. What we looked at and what we presented during the census update presentation was our response time to that area, as well as all of the growth. So if you looked at the number of permits and actual construction that's occurred on that side of our city and our response area, it's outpaced even our most recent station, Station 8 at East Mesa Public Safety Complex. So I can't point to a certain number of this many residents.
Okay, I see. So it's response time. So, for example, the other day I have a new employee who moved on some street off of Sonoma Ranch Boulevard North. I just kind of figured out it'd probably take me 5 minutes to get there. It took me almost 15, and it's pretty far. So the response, and so that's would be number 9, I presume, would cover that in that area.
Mayor, Fire Chief Jason Smith, yes, sir. That area we're looking at with the PUD that came before the council a few weeks ago, of locating that station at Sonoma Ranch in Central. So that station would serve that area. It also gives us an opportunity to look at what type of response unit we put in that area to maximize our ISO points and also the service that we provide for that area as it continues to develop and we see commercial infill come into the area.
Yeah, and when you look at it, I mean, and there's still more homes to go even north of that. So, I mean, if that took 15 minutes to get there, I mean, of course, I'm driving the speed limit, and I think you guys go a little bit faster, but you'll still get there not a whole lot quicker. But, so I think that is pretty urgent. I mean, it's going to take at least a couple of years before we even get, if we were to move forward with it, if it was to pass and before it's actually functional, you're probably looking at least 2 years, and in 2 years, there's going to be a lot of growth out there.
Mayor, yes, sir, that is correct. And even looking at vehicle acquisition, purchasing an apparatus, it's 24 to 25 months lead time now on a fire apparatus.
So, David, can you go back to the first one that had the fire station? And then it had one more, that one. Okay, so David, as far as the East Mesa Recreation Complex, now I know that the first GeoBond, we identified monies for pickleball, and I know that when residents came to us, we felt that we could at least get that area prepped in the event we should be successful and do 8 more. So if we were to, would that 6.5, would that be enough to address those additional 8 pickleball, giving a total of 16, which I think was the minimum number they needed for tournaments or something to that effect?
Mayor, David Cedillo, Public Works Director, yes, that if you were to allocate $6 million, that would incorporate those 8 pickleball courts and make that a full venue.
Additional 8 more, because the first
Correct.
GeoBond had 8, okay.
Correct.
And then for our, I'm sorry? Yeah. For our housing initiative people that showed up here, Beth or whomever wants to address this. Would that affordable housing initiatives of $6 million be adequate start?
Yes, thank you, Mayor, for the question. Mayor, City Council, and staff, yes, $6 million is what we would request for the Affordable Housing Initiative. That money, GO bond money, would go into the trust fund and land bank for acquisitions, and it could be leveraged significantly, as Art from Tierra del Sol was explaining, and so that we think it could fund several projects citywide throughout the city. Art, is there anything more you want to add to that?
Yeah. So,
I'm sorry, state your name again, please.
Art Marujo, Tierra del Sol Housing Corporation. So the $6 million, that's a great start. So, for instance, just to give you an example, as you all know, we have brought some light tech projects to City Council before, low-income housing tax credit projects, and there is a need for rental housing. And what they like to see, MFA, especially MFA, they want to see an investment from the city, minimum $1 million. Now, if done right, that financing mechanism can turn into a soft second loan, which can be paid back with the cash flow from the project. So say, it's not that it's going to be where a lot of people think that this money is just going to get thrown in there as a grant, but if you do this correct and you do it right, you can get that money back and revolve it. That way you can fund other projects going forward. So that's where all your leveraging is coming in from. So it's a good thing to think about.
Okay, all right, thank you. And Sonia, maybe you addressed this on the $4 million fund on this. What was that for, or what is that? If you were on number 4 and it says spread, what does the $4 million spread mean? And it has note for the fund under Parks and Rec.
Mayor, that's a typo that you caught. I was supposed to erase that.
Oh, that was a typo? Oh, okay. So Sonia wasn't looking for any money then? Okay. Okay. Councilor Coran, you have your line up.
Yes, thank you. I just had a question. I'm trying to sort of do a lot of math on my little paper here, and I also have all of the survey results. Thank you for sharing those with us, including the qualitative ones, which are really interesting, and I've been reading them with intensity since getting them. But I'm curious, which among I'm trying to figure out what babies can be split, pardon the metaphor, but it seems like some babies are easier to split than others, and could you just let us know which of those might be opportune for splitting versus not?
Mayor and Council Coran, I believe that a fire station is something that you would want to put the majority of the funds to. I think the rest of them that are on this particular thing could be split, depending on what's taking place. I don't know if any of the other staff feel the same way, but a lot of the parks rehabilitation and those items where you can do certain tangible things, I'm sure that the money could be allocated to those type of projects. Let me go to a chart that has all of them, so it might be So I think like the East Mesa Recreation Complex, you could identify various elements of that programming that could be funded. I said Fire Station number 9. I think even the affordable housing, any funds for that would be positive. The library is something that would probably be less likely, especially for a new expansion. It'd be harder to divvy that funds out. Some renovation funds could probably be provided. Neighborhood improvements, obviously, they would utilize whatever funding they could get. Same thing with trails. It can be broke down to smaller projects. The additional fields and multi-purpose center, I think smaller amounts could be allocated to do studies. New parks, you may want to look at that as part of development and your impact fees that are related to that and may not be as critical for a GO bond. And hopefully I haven't misspoken, Sonia.
Thank you, that helps, thanks.
Councilman Como?
Thank you. David, and maybe this question is for more than just David, grant staff, Parks and Rec staff. I'm curious if, what other means of funding have we discussed as a city, have you discussed as a city for finishing out the East Mesa Recreation Complex? That's outside of bonds.
Yeah, Mayor and Councilor Bencomo, can I pass that to you, Sonia?
Mayor, members of council, Sonia Delgado, Director of Parks and Recreation. At this point in time, with regards to the East Mesa Recreation Complex, we don't have another funding source. We have looked at grants. Grants works very closely with us to find funding for facilities. One in particular, we want to go after a rec center, but those are very difficult to get, the very large ones, and it would be difficult to have a lot of smaller ones to try and finish that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Sonia. I mean, I guess I'll just say this now because it's just on my heart, and if I don't say it, I'm just going to drive myself crazy with how much I feel torn about many of these things. I think that a fire station is critical. For me, that's going to be one of my top priorities. Affordable housing will too. And honestly, I would love to see the rest go into neighborhood improvements. And as much as it pains me, I feel like we have to invest in the rec facility. I mean, the rec complex. It's going to be a bad luck if we have this giant unfinished project that we don't continue to invest in. And so, you know, as I sit here and look at all the options, on page 24, I think number 3 is the most critical. If anything, potentially reducing the $6 million for affordable housing to 5, and then, you know, giving that to the fire station to fully complete it out. But I just want to say that out loud before I change my mind again. It's almost like I'm sitting at a restaurant looking at the menu and can't decide what to eat, but $23 million worth of that. So thank you.
Mayor and Councilor Bencomo, something else that you might think of, you'll notice that several of these projects have broken out recreational items, and so you may consider writing a more flexible question that you could give certain discretion exactly how you want to spend that. The negative or downside to that is it's harder to go out to the public and say this is what we're going to do with those monies, and there is potentially less trust.
David, what happens if, let's say, the market stables out and things don't cost an arm and both legs? What happens if you finish a project under budget? Has that ever happened, first of all? Yes. What happens with GO bonds if you finish a project under budget?
Mayor and Council, I don't know.
David, you'd never be able to get away with that answer any other time.
Mayor, Councilor Bencomo, David Cedillo, Public Works Director. Based on how that's placed on the ballot, typically it will only be used within that question. So if it is for, say, park improvements, listed in there, they can spend it. If they're under budget, they can use that additional money for those park improvements. If it's for any other project, whatever's under, you can utilize it based on how that question is written and voted on.
Let's say, so last time we were here, right, I asked the question about why is the new fire station double the cost of the one we just built? And the answer was inflation and all of those things. And maybe it won't, you know, balance out or whatever, like maybe things will never go back to how they used to be, more affordable. But let's say for something as specific as the fire station, if, you know, we say on the ballot it's $11 million and it comes under budget, what happens then with something so specific?
Councilor Bencomo, thank you for the question. Actually, with the site that's been proposed from the PUD, there are still other improvements that need to happen
Okay.
for the site and for the roadway leading up. So any cost savings could be moved over to that.
Okay, thank you, David. I appreciate it, both of you.
And of course, also, don't forget that if it really is that significant, you can apply that back toward the bond and reduce that amount. I mean, that you just pay it off quicker. So, but I've never seen that happen. But if it does. But that was my question was, are these estimates based on today's inflationary prices? Because if this doesn't get built in a couple of years, it's very possible that it could actually come down. So that was a very good question. So these prices were based on?
Mayor, they were very conservative measures. They took into account the inflation, the supply chain, and the fact that the projects may not be allocated for another 2 years. So like I said, they're very conservative figures.
And Councilor Bencomo, I appreciate your comments. The reason why I was okay with the difference of $1 million between 11.5 and 10.5 is because if you recall, council passed the safety ordinance, public safety, and so that was going to provide probably enough to make up the difference in those 2 years. So, but I mean, whatever council wants to do, they can do. But
That's a great reminder, Mayor. Thank you.
So I was going to ask. In fact, I was going to ask if on the East Mesa complex, if they could trim that to 6 and the fire station to 10, leaving $500,000 each for, well, I didn't even ask George what it would take to get the bike lanes, if that was $500,000 to help elevate. I think we're bronze right now, if that helps us elevate to silver. And then the other $500,000 for Parks and Rec to do some improvements. I mean, there's always something, seems like, especially for soccer fields, and that's just a little bit of money. And now you've kind of, spread it out a little bit more, but I didn't know if that was going to be detrimental. So, Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mayor. I thought it was time to weigh in, and thank you, Mayor, and my council here. For me, I think our fire station is #1 priority. Close second is affordable housing for sure, but I want people to be reminded that safety is paramount for us, for me. I appreciate Chief reminding us about the call, how quickly it takes to get from one call to the next. And if we don't do this, it takes from other facilities, right? Because we're taking too long, and we don't want that, and we want our rating to remain where it's at. So I think that's really important when we express that our whole city can really be challenged if we don't do this. The affordable housing, I think, is next, and then the neighborhood improvements. I think streets has always been something else, and I want to really honor folks that have took the time to fill out the survey. I mean, I think that's a record, 2,000 plus folks that participated in this survey. I think I'd love to see the spread and who and demographics and ages and whatnot, but I think that's really important, and I think every day we get some concern about streets, and especially streets in my area or low-income areas where are more impoverished, streets that have never had really any improvements from the time at least I've been here. And so I'd really like to see a list, David, if we could, of those streets that are, you can just send the link, I know, of the less than 40. I think that will be very important. And then along the lines of Mayor, I was wondering, I think trails are also important, right? In our park improvements, those are all quality of life issues. So David, can you move to 25? This is a really hard choice that we have to make, and I'm here stressing out about how can we get the better bang for our buck, but make sure that all pockets of our community or cohorts of our community are considered.
And so I'm wondering if council would, Mayor talked a little bit about reducing some of that money and giving more, but I was wondering if in the first 3, we could go even to 5.6 and also include some funding in our East Mesa Recreation Center. So, I mean, I don't know. I kind of figured, I'm hoping that with what Councilor Bencomo and Councilor and Mayor spoke of, that as we are building, I don't think we're going to build tomorrow or January 2023 after these pass, and I'm thinking very positively about this, that maybe there's a chance that things would continue to go down as some of that construction I'm hearing and supplies are going down, the reduction in price I think I've heard, and so I'm just trying to also consider all the things that folks have indicated here and really honor what people are trying to tell us. And so I guess I'm more inclined to go for the spread so that we can fund more. And just continue to look for that funding, go for capital outlay funding as the years come, as the years for the next legislative session. So with that, Mayor, I'll turn it back over to you. Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem, I'm sorry, I was a little confused. So which of these, and this, of course, this one changed. Did you want to go back to the other one?
I did. I went back and forth. So 25, I stuck with 25.
Oh, okay.
And I was really looking at the spread number 3 and going from 5.6. But as I'm looking at it and the way I'm speaking and the way I'm feeling very emotional about all these things, because I think they're all very important, and I feel like
Mayor and Councilor Gondra, 3 and 4, there was no analysis, and those weren't tried to be matched up with projects. It's the 23 million divided by 3 and divided by 5.
Gotcha.
So there's a lot of flexibility if you
Okay.
were to take other projects.
Okay.
So Mayor Pro Tem, you were talking about this slide or the other slide?
No, this one here, Mayor was talking about this.
So you were talking about number 4?
I like number 4. As I'm even speaking, my mind has changed because I was looking at 3 and calculating, even if we went 5.6 and left some additional, I don't know, what is hard for me is you gave that picture of East Mesa Recreational Center, phase 1. What's phase 2 and what it would cost, and what are you considering in that phase 2 with a cost? You don't have that currently.
Mayor and Councilor Gondra, I see Mr. Trevino is going to be here also, but these are all amenities that have been identified on that master plan that are necessary to complete future phases or the build out of it. And so staff would probably look at it the opposite. If you allocated a certain amount of money, we would try to knock off as many of these in a fashion as we could.
Mayor Pro Tem Gondra, Tony Trevino, Public Works for the record. Just want to come up here to kind of help spread some light on this East Mesa. We have, with the first phase, we have done a lot of preparation for the next phase of East Mesa, a lot of the utilities. So we went into the project with the intent of quickly going into the next phases, a lot of grading, a lot of utility work to kind of get ready for the next phase. And just to kind of put into the lighting, there's no lighting as part of phase 1. That would have to be left out of a lot of the parks. The lighting is about, Sonia, correct me if I'm wrong, about $3 million just for the lighting for these parks. So safety, a lot of those parks, none of those parks, those amenities will have lights, so they will not be able to be used past dusk for a lot of those sports. So that is one of the big things that's going to have to be put into the next phase, which is about $3 to $4 million.
How much again?
About $3 to $4 million just for the lighting for those parks, and that was valued out of the first phase just because of cost. So just kind of wanted to share that with you also for some of the project history.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate that. I don't have really anything else to say.
I've got another question for Chief Smith. So, Chief, right now the department is ISO 1 So is there a certain response time that the city must maintain to continue to keep that ranking of 1? Because I'm just concerned as there's more and more houses get built further north, that time elapse might get longer. And that's why I think the time is of the essence for Fire Station 9.
Mayor, members of council, Fire Chief Jason Smith. So response time is one facet of the ISO evaluation. They look at our dispatch center as well as our water utility, even things like fire and hydrant inspections, as well as the tools and equipment and daily staffing. So prolonged response time is going to be one factor of that overall rating. But as we get more and more infill and more residents living there, more call volume, obviously that starts to impact the service we provide more towards the customer. So times where there is a structure fire, our delayed response is jeopardizing lives and property. And then on EMS calls, like every minute that we're delayed is more damage to your heart, your brain, your lungs. So we try to keep our response times close to NFPA 1710 as we can, but even given the size of our community, our strategic business plan, we look at a 7-minute response 90% of the time.
Okay, thank you. I know we keep going back and forth. Can we just stay on maybe 24 and then if council wants to deviate from that? Because that's a little bit easier. That's what was presented 2 weeks ago. That's kind of what I thought was going to show up today, not 25, not slide 25. Based on this, I'm sorry, Councilor Beta, go ahead.
No, sure, thank you. Mayor, I was just going to say, for slide 24, my pick would be number 3 as well, with the caveat that we would look during the legislative session to make solvency for Fire Station 9 for anything extra. And then still going for the affordable housing, but then the East Mesa complex. And just because I do think we marketed that the last time around as a complex and the vision of what it would be in full. And so I think that's also another reason for us to be able to deliver on that. Thanks.
Okay. Did you have something, Councilor Graham?
Yeah, I'm just thinking. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, everyone who has presented and commented so far. So when looking through the agenda packet, I looked at the percentages and I looked at the statistics, but I also went through all of the comments, which are a mishmash, and I can assure anyone who commented, whatever you said, somebody said the exact opposite. So if you feel like your voice isn't being heard, everybody else does too. I'm listening to all of this, and I think I'm thinking a little more philosophically or conceptually about how so many of these things blend together. And I refer to the comments because I feel like one of the overriding themes is please take care of what we have and who we are. So when I look at reinvestment in existing neighborhoods and I hear about affordable housing, the lines between these things are very blurred. And maybe I'm just saying that because it makes my heart feel a little better, that I think the separations between these projects are perhaps not as stark as we think they are. I appreciated, thank you so much to the folks who spoke on affordable and attainable housing, pointing out what a wide swath of people that affects, because I think the default position is that that's referring only to our unhoused neighbors, and it is, but it's not. I believe the representative from Tierra del Sol pointed, people making $60,000 are still in need of affordable housing. So all that to say that I think that maybe the divisions between these initiatives and these priorities are maybe a little closer or a little narrower than they may seem at first. And also, while we have slide 24 up here, I'm also tending to favor option 3 right now. I feel the need for Fire Station 9 is undeniable. And again, for those who feel like, well, that only favors one small portion of the city, speaking as someone with a little more than working knowledge of how fire works, because my husband's out there fighting fires, if District 5 is overburdened, then your district is also being overburdened, because when Station 5 is trying to haul butt out to their thing, other stations are covering them. So don't think that something that is taking care of District 5 is leaving your district out. We're a big team and a big family here. So yeah, thanks for asking, Mayor.
That's no problem. Councilor Flores.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a question for Director Delgado. So on this, on page 24, we have parks and recreation improvements, and $4 million has been allocated, and just in one spread. So, which would be the last one, which would be, what, 8 years from now? Or how does that work? Yeah. The spreads,
It would be, if the bonds were approved, they would be allocated in the next 4 years.
Yeah, the next 4 years. So my question to you, Director Delgado, is I think it was either in a bad dream or in the newspaper that our facilities are falling apart, or maybe somebody sent us an email, or again, maybe it was a nightmare. But it did show that a lot of the facilities are decrepit. It was an email, and I think I shared it with you, or you shared it, I can't remember. But anyway, aren't there city funds or whatever that maintenance for park? It was a bathroom, I can't remember the park, but I know we've had different comments from the community at different. So is there a fund, a line item allocation in the budget for Parks and Recreation to have a facility maintenance or structural maintenance?
Mayor, members of council, Councilor Flores, Sonia Delgado, Director of Parks and Recreation. We do have a line item that we were able to get last fiscal year and this fiscal year. We have approximately $100,000 that were given to us for Parks and Recreation amenity improvement and or replacement. When it comes to the facilities in our facilities, i.e. a restroom, we work closely with facilities because they're the ones who maintain it. So when we have issues, we go to them and ask them to assist us with either painting, new signage, help with the restrooms and anything that's inside that facility. That isn't directly tied to us, but it sits in one of our facilities.
So knowing that some of these park facilities, I am talking about the bathrooms, the toilets, and I think some of them need replacement, the sinks, the floors, the walls, the doors in the bathroom stalls. So that is separate and apart from Parks and Recreation improvements altogether, or maybe that's something that Mr. Peely can address. And I'm just trying to figure out whether, because I tend to agree that the spread 3 would be a better way of spending our GO bond money. On the other hand, our Parks and Recreation improvements, are those improvements that I'm talking about, or is that just facilities maintenance, and is there money for that? That's what I'd like to know. What do these improvements really mean? Is it going to be a new plant, a new tree, or what?
Councilor Flores, so when it comes to the Parks and Recreation improvements, we're talking about replacement of trash cans, tables, shade structures, water fountains, or putting some in, new signage, fencing, soccer goals, things of that nature. When it comes to the actual restroom facility, like I'd mentioned before, we'll work directly with facilities to try and find funding for that. And we do work in concert together. So but their responsibility is for the actual facility.
Okay, so then maybe this is a question for Ms. Demouche. Is there enough money in facilities to take care of what may be this PNR, Parks and Recreation allocation? I mean, GO bond money would be used for?
So Mayor Pro Tem, and Councilor Flores, the facilities, which is under the city manager's office, does have a budget for redoing bathrooms, you know, anything that any of the departments or buildings need to have repairs on. As far as renovations, I do know that in the CIP, they do have some funding for ongoing maintenance every year. In the CIP, we budget that. But at this time, Councilor Flores, I don't have any numbers in front of me, but what I would recommend, and I'll get with Alex Flores, who is our new facilities manager, and try to get that information to you.
Well, thank you, and it'd be great to have that information before we vote on this on July or whatever it is. Well, it's going to be sometime in July. So so Parks and Recreation improvements, what does that encompass then, Mr.? Thank you so much, Director Delgado, and thank you, Ms. Demouche. Mr. Weir, what exactly then is this Parks and Recreation improvements? Is it playground? Is it, you know, development of a play area or more grass or what?
Mayor and Councilor Flores, it's just what Ms. Delgado said. It would be replacing trash cans, replacing shelters, tables, putting up signage, replacing fences. Everything that's within your existing parks would be eligible to use those funds.
Thank you, Mr. Weir, and thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councilor Bencomo.
Thank you, Mayor. I don't mean to complicate things more, but I just wanted to go back to the point you had made earlier about going with number 3, but then sort of taking that 0.5 from both the rec complex and the fire station, and then maybe even affordable housing to 5, having a full round 2 million for perhaps parks improvements. I would hate to have questions on the ballot for, you know, $500,000 per. I don't think that would go well with the public. And if we're going to do something like that, to have sort of a bigger number in one question, and then that could be, you know, honestly, it could be some finishing up of the trails or parks improvements. I think either of those would be important, but that's sort of how I was looking at this, because I thought you made a good point about making that number, you know, rec complex 6, fire station 10, going to the state legislature, thinking about the public safety fee, and then 5 for affordable housing, and rounding up, you know, having additional 2 million.
You know, Councilor Bencomo, I could support that. I just would prefer that, and I know David was just using some examples, but on that 2 million, that it be a real, you know, some real facility, something that you can see, you know, instead of, what did you say? There was renovating some picnic table or
picnic table, playground equipment,
or trash bags. You know, not trash cans. You know, I don't think that's good. Just something significant, something that you can, you know, see. I think would be good. I'm okay with that, with trimming that, because I really think that in a couple of years, it's very possible that those prices can come down a little bit. And so, and then we've, especially for the fire station, we've got that impact fee, public safety fee that I think, and then worst case scenario, we're going to get that thing built. If we have to pull money from our other reserves or whatever, we'll get it completed. But I think it shows skin in the game to the public that we're not just trying to just put everything on here to say, here, you guys fund it. You know, we'll figure out some ways here as well. Councilor Curran?
I just want to sort of elevate that in reading all of the comments and in looking at the other thing, I really have to hear that folks are thinking about their roads, and that's not included in this representation. And I really appreciated the graph that showed overlapping areas of low PCI and low income neighborhoods. And I really feel like I would like to advocate for, I think about the suburbanification factor as someone in District 5, and so I have to acknowledge that I am coming to this from a place where our PCI collectively is probably like 75, if I had to guess, not to put you on the spot with the math, but so it's kind of a different scenario, but I do feel like concentrating resources, and that includes the adding on to the East Mesa Recreation Complex outside of the heart of town. For me, I feel like in the face of seeing how many folks really want their roads to be improved and how we have a very clear measure about how we could do that and who it would affect, I really want to elevate that be included in as I don't know how, I think it could be included as at least part of this to show that we're committed to improving roads in the city, and in particular parts of the city that may feel generally neglected, so.
Councilor, I think those are good comments, but I have to say that the amount that's going to be needed for roads is going to be significant. I mean, we won't be able to do a whole lot with $1 million, but I will say, or $2 million, but I will ask David Cedillo or Tony if they've ever looked at, like, for example, there's a certain amount of recurring monies that we use for road maintenance and road construction. I don't know, 4 or 5 million, something like that. And I'm wondering if we've ever looked at using that as the funding source to actually go out and get a 5 or 10 year bond for a large amount, 50 million, or and then using that to pay it each year so that we really make that impact. But I can assure you, what's interesting is several years ago when the city undertook the largest reconstruction project in the city, we were getting complaints about all these orange barrels all over the city. I mean, it's you try to improve the area and you get criticized. You get criticized for the areas being messed up too. So I mean, but nonetheless, what I'm trying to get at is I think that if we can possibly look at that as a future project to use that revenue source, because it is a revenue source, we fund it every year, to use that as to pay the debt service on a larger bond, then we can focus on good parts of the city throughout the city to get those streets done. And then economies of scale will allow us to probably do even more streets than we would normally because it's going to be a bigger project. So, David?
Mayor, David Cedillo, Public Works Director. Yes, typically we'll cycle bonds for street, flood. We do have the gas tax that comes in. Roughly anywhere between, depending on the year, anywhere between $8 to $10 million that gets cycled through there. We have not gone for larger amounts, but that is something that we can definitely take a look at and seeing how we can advance that a little bit further. When you say use the money that's already allocated, that's the maintenance fund that council currently approved to help spend some of that debt down. That way we can get a larger amount and make a little bit larger dent in our PCI rating.
All right, thank you.
Mayor, can I just add to that? Because I think I want to honor that as well, what you're saying. Again, if it was up to me, we'd do $23 million for all the roads, David, and you'd have a job forever. But because it's the biggest thing, I just also feel like, this should have come to work session, Mayor. Like, we have to figure out, get creative, and be bold about different ways that we fund street pavement that isn't just bonds, right? That is from the state, from the federal government. I don't know, right? But I think it's really critical that we have a much more focused conversation on street maintenance and street improvement projects.
Councilor, sure, we can have a work session on that, and I just feel that we have to be real cautious if we put street maintenance or reconstruction of streets on a GEO bond, because people are going to know, wait a minute, 5 million, 2 million, whatever the million is, they're going to say, which streets are there? And then we have to identify them, and then people may not vote for it. It's going to say, well, I've been living on the street for 35 years and it's crumbling, I'm voting no on that one.
Mayor, I wasn't advocating to
no,
include them
I know,
on the
but I'm just
bonds,
saying,
but I'm just saying, yeah.
I'm just saying that I think we really need to look at the work session on bond cycling and maybe looking to take that amount of money for a larger bond so that we can address the streets. Because I think, again, the public expects us on regular maintenance and things of this nature to take care of that through our own budget. Now, these larger projects, like whether it's the fire station or the East Mesa complex, I mean, this is something that all citizens of Las Cruces will enjoy, and I appreciate Councilor Graham's explanation about how when one department is out, they're keeping the rest of the city safe, and so that's a great explanation. But I just wanted to say that about the roads.
Mayor, I've heard there has been a general consensus that you want to pursue a question related to the fire station, affordable housing, and the East Mesa Recreation Complex. And then you would also, staff can do further research into neighborhood improvements and general park improvements. Is that a fair statement of your discussion today? And that when we start formulating questions in those, in that order, I've heard a majority of the councilors say fire and affordable housing, and then also continued improvement to the East Mesa Recreation Complex.
I think it was a hybrid of number 3. So East Mesa would be 6 mil, fire station would be 10 million, housing would be 5, and then that remained 2 million. And was that for parks and recreation improvements? And so I guess get with Sonia where that could go. I don't know if that could also include skate park. I have no idea. Whatever. Well, you have the skate park going, then you can have the younger group out there knocking on doors to vote for this. I don't know. I don't know where you want to put that 2 million, whatever you need, and bring back to council and see what you have. What do you all think about that breakdown?
Yeah, Mayor, I like it. I mean, pulling that sort of 2 million, you heard me do that. I don't need to repeat it. But I mean, yeah, I think Parks and Rec improvements that see a way to figure out how to make them seem tangible, to me felt like a really good way forward.
And to our affordable housing initiatives people, go ahead, come up, Joe. I mean, 5 million, if you can get 5 million, that's a pretty good start. I think you all were looking for a few $100,000.
Thank you, Joe Galvan Nash. I'm a member of the coalition. A couple of things I'd like to comment about. 5 would be a great start. We prefer 6. But I want to point out something that is really hard to do, which is what you're struggling with today. And this is based on my own 31 years of working with 20 bond issues and mill levies. The rubric that you establish is what helps you decide what to do, because everybody has a specific thing that's at the top of their priority. You've got to look at it through the rubric that you have established. In your current rubric, you have nothing about equality, and you don't have anything for maintaining your existing facilities, like your library. So I think those are improvements that you can make on the rubric itself. But basing all of your needs against a rubric with a weighted system will help you rise to the top. What is it that we really need to have to do first? Because you don't have enough money to do all of these things, and yet you have to maintain commitments of previous bonds. You've got to have safety, fire station. You've got to have affordable housing as a good start. So how do you make sure that you're all doing that in a way that you can show the public, well, this one, your walking trail only had 1 point for safety, your fire station had it at 10, and vice versa. Maybe your rubric includes health and environment. Well, maybe your walking trail got an 8 and your fire station got a 7. I mean, I'm just making up scenarios. But that rubric is key in helping you decide which one of these is most important, because everybody has their own pick, but you've got to look at from a 30,000-foot umbrella. And my only other comment is about phasing. It's okay to phase projects. Your fire station, if you see that it's needed, you can phase a fire station. You can do the architectural work and the drawings. That could be a phase. You could do phase 2 as the main core of your fire station with 1 bay. Your phase 3 could be, we're going to add 2 more bays, and we're going to have the footprint already done for it. So there are ways to phase even something as important as a fire station. Maybe you just want to do the drawings and then phase 1 and have 1 bay, and then in 4 years, you're going to put 2 more bays. So I don't think you have to think of it as just, it's all one project right now. It does save you money in the long run, but if you have so many projects in your community and you only have 23 million, there are opportunities to do parts of projects and then make them priorities for your next bond in 4 years. So thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Joe. Was there somebody else? No, I said thank you, Joe. Was there somebody else that had? Okay. So I just heard from Councilor Bencomo. I didn't really kind of saw a couple nods. I mean, what do you think about that breakdown?
Can you repeat that breakdown again?
Yeah, it was 6 million. So looking at number 3 spread, so it'd be 6 million instead of 6.5, 2 million for Parks and Rec improvements, 10 million for Fire Station 9, 5 million for affordable housing initiatives. And then 0 and 0, the other 2. Councilor Abita?
Thank you, Mayor. And then are we going to be intentional with our capital outlay then to make up any of the differences?
I'm sorry, we're going to be what?
Are we going to be intentional when we decide our capital outlay priorities to make sure that we're completing?
Sure, I think that would be a good idea.
Great, then I'm okay with it.
Yes.
Okay. So, Ifo, I think the direction, if they can come back with that,
Start working on
and
questions.
if you can get with Sonia as to what that 2 million Parks and Rec improvements would be. Okay. All right, great. So next item is GeoBond quarterly update. So David and Tony. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Appreciate it.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. David Cedillo, Public Works Director, and I'll be going over the 2018 Go Bond Program update. So first project here under question 1, we have park and sports courts. This project is complete. However, we are not, or we're holding off on completing finalized paperwork. We did have several sites that were visited by the Governor's Commission on Disabilities by a consultant named Ms. Hope Reed. She is a consultant for accessibility consultants for the state. She came down, reviewed several projects on here, and did make recommendations. She did note that the Governor's Commission on Disabilities is not a regulatory agency and does not issue permits or waivers. However, they are also not an administrative process to assure compliance with the ADA, but they believe that their recommendations and opinions do have considerable impact if any accessibility designs or features would ever come up in the future. So they do ask that we look at those recommendations and see if we can incorporate them into some of these improvements. Now, to give you some examples of what those were, over at Apodaca Pickleball Courts, they did note, and I'm not going to list all of them, however, they did note some route issues with, we do have access to 2 gates on the south side, but there's a gate on the north side. It says that they're recommending that we provide an accessible route over to that side and that gate. Also, for hardware, some of the gates had the latches higher than the recommended height, and also recommended that we put kick plates on both sides since that gate does swing in both directions. Also, they did have some recommendations for the parking lot there at Apodaca Park. The asphalt at this point is a little old, deteriorated, not as smooth, and they asked for some updated striping and sign improvements. More specifically on the sign, it does have the handicap sign, but it does not have the notation that violators will be either fined or towed away. With this report, we have sent that over to the contractor and their design professional, and we are awaiting a response back from them based on the design that they turned in for the project. Now, completing this, at our last Go Bond update, we did state that there were going to be some erosion improvements over at Young Park. This is the completed portion of that erosion project. There's the pavilion, and this erosion is between the pavilion and the pond there at Young Park. So at this time, the contract is for $1.8 million, and we've spent 1.82 on the contract. We spent 1.8. Another question, our project on question 1 is Unidad Park. The project is approximately 59% complete. The revised completion date from the contractor has moved out towards later part of November. At this point in time, if you can see here with the cursor, the shade structures along the park have been completed along with the foundations for the restroom. The sidewalks are approximately 80% complete. We do have plumbing in the splash pad that's ongoing, and the new play equipment, which you can see here, has been installed. Now, as part of this project, they are seeing some material delays. That has to do with the bathroom partitions. They are a composite material that's not a standard bathroom partition because it will be exposed to some elements from the environment, the outdoors. It's not a fully enclosed. There will be space above and below the doors, so they will be exposed to some of those elements. They are private, though. They do have doors, and they will serve those purposes, but they have to resist those elements. We are seeing delays on that, and that's what's pushing the schedule out to later November. However, with that, internal staff has started looking at options to see if we have any partitions that we can utilize in the interim. Should all the improvements happen before we receive those and we can open the park, we are looking at options to see what we can do to substitute something temporarily. That way, if we need to open, we can do that sooner. Here, you will have your percentages of both billing and then those of what was estimated. Chart to the left, again, is the amount spent or billed by the contractor with the time on the project itself. The graph over to the right is the expended curvature during the planning phase. Your red line is our actuals. As you can see, we're still ahead of that estimated time. East Mesa Public Rec Complex, percentage complete on this project is 21%. Now you will notice that the estimated completion date is extending into 2023 as of February. That is based on the latest construction schedule from the contractor. Again, these are just an estimate. Grading of the baseball and softball fields are being completed to their final grade. As Mr. Trevino says, as part of this project, we're also grading out for the future expansions of some of these sports fields and courts. Also, the grading of the pickleball courts that has begun as well too. Now, the pictures that you see on the bottom with the pipe, those are not part of the project, but they are the roadway construction that's leading into the complex. The picture on the top is the portion of the grading for those sports fields. Again, wanted to reiterate on the completion date, these are estimated times. There is a possibility, and the contractor and the city and the consultant are both working to expedite the schedule as much as possible, although we are seeing some delays with certain materials. So that's why the construction schedule is bumped out. Should construction move out into FY20 or calendar year 2023, our goal is to have the Go Bond funding expended before December 30th. allowing that additional ARPA funding to complete the project. Again, here you have the same graphs. On the left, 21% has been billed. We have a time of 41%. The time graph on the right, you will see that we are under with the actual billings as to what was planned out. At this point, we have awarded a contract of $6 million. 1.2, nearly 1.3 has been spent. The last project on question 1 are the dog parks. You will notice, and if you recall, this project was incorporated with the Animal Services Center. So the percentages, dates, construction, estimated completion are for both those projects combined. So the delays are not happening on the dog park as you see on the schedule there up at the right with the little block. I'll explain those here in the next slide for the Animal Services Center. At this point, the project as a whole is completed out to 67%, and estimated completion date is early December. For the dog park at Rinconada, the earthwork is nearly complete. The site concrete has been finished, and they have received furnishings for the park. Burned Lake Dog Park is a little bit further along. They do have the irrigation system that is nearly complete, and the landscape has been installed. For the Animal Services Center, you're going to start to see a lot of improvements very, very fast. Even some of these pictures that are on here have already been dated from the time we did the presentation to what's actually on site. So the roadway and parking areas are nearing completion. They have the curb and gutter. They're working on the subgrade, and we'll be paving soon. The building shell is complete, and if any of you have passed by and taken a look at the building, they are starting to install the finish materials for the exterior. So with that, the utilities inside were nearly complete. They have electrical, plumbing, HVAC, and the fire sprinkler system. The drywall is about a third of the way done, and as you can see, the glazing is ongoing. That's the windows, doors on the treatments for the entryways to the facility. Both projects combined at this point, 67% has been billed, 76% of the time has elapsed. And again, the chart on the right, we are below their planned, but as things start to finish, we are expecting that creep up and meet up with the planned costs. Fire station number 3, there's a lot of information here. You saw a lot of this the last time. But some of the things that I do want to mention here, the last thing holding up the fire station, and when I say hold up, is project completion. Fire has had their CO, they've moved into the building, it's operational. If you recall, at the last update, we had access control with the hardware. We are still having issues. We did receive notice that there's still another 2-month delay on receiving those things. At this point in time, the city, the consultant, and the contractor are looking to see if we can use another vendor to get those items in. And I skipped over the delay for the Animal Services Center because the delay on that project is similar to this. That hardware that we're waiting, or basically is going to be installed as part of that project, we're starting to see those delays now. So to anticipate that, again, as a group, the contractor, the consultant, and the city have looked at options. Let's start ordering temporary hardware in case we do run into that time crunch where we're not receiving those materials, and we can actually place those on there and have the building operational. Now, once we get the final equipment, then we can swap that. Again, I think most of you have seen how nice the fire station is. Here's some renderings of the finished product there off of Valley. Again, we're nearly complete. We're waiting to close that out until once we get that hardware and we can finish it out. If you can take a look on that graph on the right, we've been paralleling that same line for a while. This is the only item we need to close out. Next, we have the walking, jogging, bike trails. Again, 97% complete. I think you've heard commentary that the trails are at a point to where they're substantially complete. Punch list items are being done, they're being used, and that's the whole intent once we reach substantial completion, so they could be used. But some of those items that we still have ongoing, we're still doing some cleanup on parts of the trails over here behind the Las Cruces Police Department that heads out over to Madrid. Stout Farm, the fence is complete. That is one of those items that was added on as part of some of those negotiations with the permit. And also, we're looking at a 4-foot high fence survey and installation at Amador. That is ongoing. Again, punch list items are being completed as we move forward. There is an estimated completion date of September 6th. Again, making sure that if we have any delays with any of that fencing material, we can have enough time to complete it. However, we're not expecting it to lead out that far. Contract on this project is 2.48. We spent about 2.42. Again, about 97% complete. We have 81% of time. And again, we're starting to increase and go above that estimated planned cost time. Here you have the program budget for each project. As you notice, as some of these projects continue and move forward, you will start to see that they are completed. For example, we have some things here, that final cost there for the fire station. And as we move along on some of those other projects, sports courts and rehabilitation, and also the walking, jogging trails that are nearing and moving forward. Just an overall show of those projects and the timelines. As you can see, we have a couple of projects that are completed. Hadley Avenue, Park and Sports Courts. Again, based on the comments early in the presentation, we're holding off on closing documents for that. But you can see how those project schedules have moved out. Overall, as a program, we billed to these projects about 74%, and there's about 85% of the time that has elapsed. And that is, again, taking into account the $35.6 million over the 4 years. And off to the right is our projected total of what we thought were going to be spent incrementally on these projects, and you can see that we're down below. Again, as noted, we are having, you'll start to see a lot of those dollar amounts get closer and closer, especially with the finishes to some of those larger projects like the East Mesa Public Rec Complex and the Animal Services Center. And with that, I'll go ahead and stand for any questions.
Okay, thank you, David. Councilor Bencomo, Councilor Flores.
Thanks, Mayor. Thank you, David. Yeah, just a couple questions. For the multi-use trails, the fencing and some of the crossings like Hoagland, McClure, those were all part of the original budget, right? Those are not things that sort of came up later that now you have to figuring out how to pay for?
Mayor, Councilor Bencomo, the pavement markings and signs were. The fence was something that was negotiated as part of the project to move some of the approvals of the permits along the trail systems.
Okay. How much is being fenced? I know the trail that's right by my house, between the one that's off of Alameda and connects, I think it's the Armijo lateral that connects to the existing multi-use trail. There's a great fence that went up there. It looks really good. How much more of that do you expect to be going up?
I believe those were the only two locations that we had.
Okay, wonderful. The 2% public art piece, I know for sure that the Firehouse 3 has a public art installation. Do you include that as part of the timeline or no?
Councilor Bencomo, are you talking about the piece specific to the fire station?
Yeah.
No, that is something separate.
It's separate, but it's paid, so like funding to pay for that comes out of this GO bond budget.
Councilor Bencomo, I'm not sure if we allocated that percentage. We did? Okay.
It was not allocated?
I just got verification that it was.
It was. Okay, thank you. So then you don't include that in the timeline then? That doesn't have to be part of the completion timeline?
Correct.
Okay. And then just my last request really is, you know, as we head into this new cycle and to the election, and I wish PIO was here, but I'm sure they're listening, just in terms of how we continue to tell this. You've been doing a great job, but I think just a more intentional push for how we tell the story of these Go Bond projects, especially the ones that might not be like visibly done until after the election. You know, really being visual about like how far they've gotten, how close they are to being used for those specific ones, right, that are not. But the ones that are completed, I think, you know, I was asking, so, George mentioned an official opening of the trails, like how are we celebrating some of those completed projects, like the firehouse, we had a ribbon cutting. I just feel like those things are important, especially as we head into a new cycle where we're requesting the voters to, you know, vote on a new set of projects. It's important that they see the good work that has been done.
Thank you, Councilor Bencomo. And we are looking at some of those events with some of these other projects as we come to completion. I do want to mention that our PIO office, our communications office, did a great video on the trails that's up on the city's website. So if you haven't seen it, please take an opportunity to do so. And we're looking at and planning to do more of those things with some of these other projects as we get near and close to the completions of those.
Councilor Flores.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thank you again, Mr. Cedillo. So there's $9 million that hasn't been spent on fire station number 3, but you said that between now and completion date, that money will be spent?
Mayor, Councilor Flores, no, just the opposite. We're getting close. We've billed out that much, and the only item that we're needing to close out is that small portion of the hardware itself.
So how much money are we talking about then?
Councilor Flores, that final invoice I'll have to get with staff. I don't know what that equates to.
So the entire amount that was for that project has already been expended? Then where did I get that $9 million hasn't been spent?
Now, what you may see is I think there's a balance of $95,000
$95,000
on the project.
Okay. So is there ever any money left over on Go Bond allocations?
We did have, so on question 1, right? Question 1 had $16.9 million, and it had a slew of projects, as you saw. We had park improvements, the sports courts, we have Unidad. So based on those estimates from there, that money, wherever we saved on one project, we were able to shift some of that money to complete other portions within question 1.
That had been voted on?
Correct.
Yes. Thank you so much, Mr. Cedillo. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Any other comments? Members of the public? You guys have anything? Okay, well, thank you, David, Tony, for the update. We appreciate it very much.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council.
Okay, I think that pretty much concludes our work session. If there's nothing further, entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved by Flores.
Second, Beta.
Motion made by Councilor Flores, second by Councilor Beta. Christine?
This is on the motion to adjourn the work session. Councilor Beta?
Yes.
Councilor Graham?
Yes.
Councilor Bencomo?
Yes.
Councilor Coran?
Yes.
Councilor Flores?
What do you want?
To
More money?
adjourn.
Oh. Yes.
Councilor Gandara?
I vote more money. No, yes.
Mayor?
Yes. Okay, it's 3:12 p.m. We're adjourned. Have a good day. You ready for the agenda setting meeting? Okay, this is the agenda setting meeting for our July 5th, 2022 City Council meeting. Number 1, consent.
1, consent.
2, non-consent.
2, non-consent.
3, consent.
3, consent.
4, non-consent.
4, non-consent.
5, non-consent.
5, non-consent.
6, consent.
6, consent.
7, non-consent.
7, non-consent.
8, consent.
8, consent.